TransVision 2022, organisée par l'Association française transhumaniste.
Il a été question ce matin de différentes manières par lesquelles nous pourrions essayer d'être plus efficaces, par lesquelles la communauté transhumaniste pourrait être plus efficace, plus convaincante, etc. Et nous avons déjà entendu que une idée qui rassemble à peu près tout le monde, c'est l'idée que nous devons faire beaucoup plus d'efforts en termes d'éducation. Éducation sans doute à tous les niveaux. Donc c'est le sujet de cette table ronde. Natchavitamo, ces derniers temps, depuis 1 an et demi, a à peu près arrêté quantité de choses de son investissement pour se consacrer à donc ce qu'elle appelle le Center for Transhumanist Studies. Ça n'est qu'un exemple parmi d'autres de ces préoccupations qui sont sans doute plus vivaces dans la communauté transhumaniste. Nous allons donc l'écouter dans un premier temps, puisque malheureusement elle n'a pas pu nous rejoindre. Et puis j'appellerai David Wood et Elise Bohan. Merci Elise d'être ici aujourd'hui. Bonsoir. Et donc il y aura un PowerPoint. Voilà. Nous commençons.
Hello, thank you for including me on this panel. I'll begin with why teach transhumanism? The world's biggest challenges are facing all of us, and learning how to recognize the causes and the potential solutions. This diverse knowledge model includes the mindset, the skill set, and the network to discuss, discover, and debate strategies. The network includes AI, robotics, digital biology, and emerging technologies that are interfacing with our everyday systems. Transhumanism is an era in which we now find ourselves today. This era needs critical thinking and visionary insight. And to learn to think like futurists, not like science fiction authors or science fiction utopians or dystopians, we need to build frameworks for the future, to develop how to adapt to the changes ahead, to understand the impacts, and to balance the pros and cons of advancing technologies, and yet to build trajectories of what the future might be beyond binary thinking, hegemony, inequities, and human strife. Should transhumanism be taught? Well, a particular answer is yes, of course. A specific answer is that the characteristics transhumanism undertakes are to question how social and economic models affect human rights and to seek opportunities and choices through alternatives. These strategic alternatives form the narratives. Consider postmodernist rhetoric. Postmodernism teaches us to distrust meta-narratives. Transhumanism teaches us to question, investigate, take action, and to explore scenarios that trigger alternatives and opportunities. Practical optimism. Now, here are specific tools that I include in the transhumanist mind shift. First, reframing our viewpoints. How do personal beliefs and outlooks clarify or diffuse what is occurring in the world? How do we get a better perspective on accelerating change? And number 2, scanning the horizon. This is a very typical one. What developments are on the horizon? What are the impacts? And how impactful are they? What is occurring that might cause events that are unforeseen or unintended consequences? And what ones will cause potential opportunities and challenges? The last one here is forecasting. Forecasting is all about those narratives, storytelling. And in order to be efficient at forecasting, we need to consider what could happen in the future and develop several different trajectories or preferred futures. Why study transhumanist topics? At the Center for Transhumanist Studies, which I founded in 2021, my aim was to help learners and leaders adapt to a world of massive change. At Transhumanist Studies, we consider that people, regardless of their differences, their background, their educational levels, it's all superfluous. that what we want is the intent of the person who wants to learn about what it means to be human, what's going to happen in the future. Will there be automation? Will I lose my job? How am I going to deal with inflation? What about longevity? Is there going to be overpopulation? Is AI going to be out of control? And then there's nanotechnology, molecular manufacturing, and the list goes on and on. These topics are core to transhumanism. In fact, they have been discussed for many decades. At Transhumanist Studies, our aim is to help people gain knowledge as a goal. This knowledge includes an ability to recognize and prepare for unpredictable events and social unrest by exploring the integration and the relationship of people, events, technologies, and advances in science. Study and learning about what makes us human, how we evolved and where our species came from, where it's headed, what we do with ourselves is an important undertaking. It's been located in the field of humanities and evolutionary biology, anthropology, social sciences for decades. Why do we need social justice and equity? What are our moral, spiritual, and intellectual similarities and differences? And how can we learn to be more compassionate and humane? Because in this transhumanist era, one of the most consequential questions about our species is, what does it mean to be human? There is a strong need and a big desire to understand what our purpose is as a species and as a human being. And not all these purposes will be the same. Humanities and transhumanities can tell us about ourselves, how we interact, and why we not always get along. The transhumanist mind shift is not located in any one field, academic department, or business agenda. It is everywhere. The history of transhumanism is consequential because in those earliest decades, we addressed AI, we addressed robotics, we addressed encryption and blockchain and Bitcoin. We addressed technologies that have now become mainstream. And within transhumanist studies, we have the primary sources with videos and published articles and books and references to help learners gain enough information that they can continue learning on their own. But I always felt it's very important to build a foundation of knowledge based on primary sources and firsthand experience. When I wrote the Transhumanist Manifesto, it was arrived at from the earlier writing in 1983 called the Transhuman Statement. In 1992, it was rewritten to be the Transhumanist Manifesto. That manifesto has grown a bit, as we all should, and as information ought to be more clear in understanding the purpose and goals of transhumanism. In closing, I want to touch on the important factors of what the takeaway in transhumanist studies is and why it's important to reframe our viewpoints, to learn about what is on the horizon, to be effective at scanning, looking ahead, to be able to put those ideas, those visual insights together to form scenarios, and to better be able to understand the pros and cons and the best options at the time in building scenarios and strategies for the future. Thank you.
Of your research. Let's take that to being human and where we are. We're in a world of AI and lots of terms and knowledge being tossed about, and wow, it's fantastic, and it is. But let's get smart here. Learn about these terms. Learn about who is authentic, who's telling you reliable information, and who's not. Make sure that you know what's being said. Don't be pulled aside by your emotions or politicizing. You be the first-hand person of your own research and knowledge gathering. It's your time to sing and shine, and that's what I think is the new human mindset. The differences to modernize the rights of living longer and taking our humanness with us, the responsibility of knowing who is programming the AI, for goodness sakes. If there's going to be strong AI, who on earth is programming it? What is the responsibility there? And each one of you should have a stake in this because it does make a difference to you. And I think that the human capability for empathy and compassion far exceeds any other quality that we have besides our precious gift of life.
That is. Merci à Natasha de ces quelques réflexions. Je vais passer la parole à David, if you want to come to the desk. David Wood from London Futurist has made a big job on the question of education.
Thank you very much for this session. In a few minutes, I'd like to add to Natasha's comments by giving my transhumanist recommendations for reforming education. Reforming education for everybody. Reforming what people learn in school and college, but also what we all learn as we seek to cope with the change in the world. From 15 years of running London Futurists, it's my observation that every serious discussion about improving the future of humanity turns into a discussion about improving the practice of education. There are few things more important. What people are learning in education is quite good, but it's not the most important skills and principles. And we have to change that. And the project I've been running for the last year or so is the Vital Syllabus Project, which I'm briefly going to introduce. And I encourage you to look at it and perhaps help out with that project. Here's why we need to change education. What people are learning today was quite useful in the 1980s or 1990s, but the world is changing more rapidly than ever. People are experiencing multiple, diverse pressures. The world is not static anymore. The world is not uniform anymore. The world has so many changes. There are wonderful opportunities, but it's not clear to people exactly what the most important opportunities are. There are terrible risks, but it's also not clear to people which risks we should fear the most. And the rate of change is accelerating, not just incremental change, that's more of the same but faster, but disruptive change, which is when the game changes. And perhaps most important, we are missing a sense of moral clarity. People used to look to some traditional sources of moral guidance, but they have been questioned as never before by the pace of change, by new scientific possibilities, by the diverse world in which we live. So for all these reasons, we are living in more uncertain, more turbulent times. And we transhumanists must help students of all ages to find the best, reliable information. There is good information around, but it's mixed up with so much that is of poorer quality. So that's what the Vital Syllabus Project is doing. It's trying to curate, that means to select, existing resources, videos, text, and also, where necessary, to create new resources that have 6 characteristics. 1, they cover the most important subjects, not just something that's interesting or fun or entertaining. They are things that will make a big difference to people's effectiveness in their lives. 2, they must be focused. They must be short and provide good information quickly on these important topics. 3rd, they should be free. There is a lot of good information around, but if you try and find it on the web, you've got to pay or log in. That's not the kind of resources I want to highlight. This Vital Syllabus Project is for everybody in the world, so long as they have an internet connection. The information The resources should be engaging, not boring, not drawn out. They should be clear, not too academic, not too much mathematics, not too much academic philosophy. They should be clear enough that an averagely smart 16-year-old will enjoy them and appreciate them. And last, they should be authoritative, trustworthy. People should feel confident that this is something they can rely on. So let's gather that information. And there is quite a lot of information that's been gathered on vitalsyllabus.org over the last year or so. So please look at it. Let me know which articles and videos you like, which ones you think aren't good enough, and where you have suggestions for better information, please let me know. That's the how of the project. I've left to last the what of the project. What are these most important areas? There's actually quite a lot. When people ask me, when I give a talk on the future, when they ask me so much is changing, what do they need to learn to have a good career in the future or to have a good success in the future, I can't just give one answer. In the end, I give 24 answers, so from time to time I'll pick one or two. I'll start with the most important skill is to be able to relearn, to unlearn what we've already learned or thought we knew, and to learn new things more quickly because the pace of change is so fast. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go through all 24 of these, but I'll point to one or two. The importance of collaboration is stronger than ever before because there's so much to learn, so we need to be better at collaborating to share our insight. I've got here longevity and technologies because most people in the world don't properly understand how quickly these areas could change. I've also got economics because many people who are excited about technology fail to appreciate the economic aspects to developing and the political or governance aspects. These need to be covered too. And then it goes beyond science. It goes beyond the philosophy of science, which is recognizing when science is likely to be reliable and when it just looks like science, it's fake science. We need to go beyond that to philosophy, and philosophy needs to be taught as never before. It's not just a mild interest anymore. We are having to take very hard decisions. The ethics of AI depend on what we decide about the ethics of humanity, and my answers to that are, indeed, transhumanism. So my answer is, should transhumanism be taught? Yes, of course. It is the best answer to the questions of where values can be taken from in today's world. Transhumanism is the culmination of humanism. It's also the culmination of many things religion tried to provide. But we must also look at what can go wrong. So down there in the end, you can see a survey of landmines. That's the things that could explode when we are trying to walk to a better future, but we don't pay enough attention. They're sometimes called existential risks. These need to be much more familiar to every student of all ages. And then there's the singularity, which I'll talk briefly about in the next section, the future of AI and ultimate futures. So I'm interested in your feedback. Which topics do you think are the most important for people to learn? Maybe you think some of this is not important. Maybe you think people don't need to understand exponentials, or they don't need to understand about foresight. I think all of these are more important than many of the things people are learning at school today. Because after all, if we're good at learning how to learn, we can pick up new engineering skills relatively quickly. But if we're not good at learning how to learn, if we're not agile enough, if we're not collaborative enough, we're going to get stuck in the past. And by the way, we certainly need emotional health as well as physical health, because with the changes and frightening things ahead of us, we're going to need emotional resilience as never before. So that's what I'm recommending as the transformation of the educational syllabus for everybody in stages. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Alice, to be here. Nice to meet you. And, well, maybe you can, the mic is open? Yes, it's okay. Well, I give the mic especially to Elise, which is coming from Australia, and not exactly you was in England just before, working for Future of Humanity Institute. Your PhD was on the history of transhumanism, but your last book is more general presentation. Well, the first question is. How do you say the importance of education for transhumanism? If we follow Natasha or David, it could be a very important thing. Do you agree with this position, or what is your own position about links between education and transhumanism?
I do agree with both Natasha and David that it's very, very important. But particularly the idea that Natasha raised, that the idea that that it's a transhuman era, this transhuman time of rapid or exponential change, that also David has highlighted of more and more things that we're struggling to process, just things that feel like there are rug pulls happening from under our feet all the time. So on that list that David threw up there, I think emotional health and communication skills are right up there in terms of human ability to process and adapt to this phenomenal change that we're starting to experience. In no small part, because we're at risk, I think, in even deeper fashion of succumbing to Luddite-type reactions to big changes in our world, because this chasm seems to be widening between our evolved biological human nature, the meat sack world of the body that walks around on two legs, that has, Paleolithic brains and Paleolithic emotions. There's this chasm that is getting wider and wider from that point of us to this very novel modern world that we've created with really advanced technologies that, as we all know in this room, are getting more and more advanced all of the time. And so I think we have this challenge that I've talked about in my book, Future Superhuman, of how do we navigate these transition times in a world where we are biologically still human? Because I think, transhumanists do get very excited and sort of talk about the exponential future. We talk about the singularity. We talk about AI and intelligence explosions. And also, very often, I think we in rooms like this one like to talk about all the spoils, all the really, really exciting things that could happen. And I'm with you guys. I'm very, very excited about the potential to ameliorate suffering, about longevity technologies, about all of the ways that we can bring about that eudaimonia that we were talking about earlier, that James was talking about. I think that is fantastic, but we have this really strange conundrum right now, which is that chasm is getting wider and we don't quite know how to be human anymore. Again, Natasha speaks to this. What does it mean to be human in the 21st century? It's getting harder and harder to feel stable and to feel a sense of, I can plan my life 30, 40, 50 years out. I can imagine what my children's lives are going to be. And I think if we have better maps from a younger age, it's not going to take away the trials and tribulations of this transition time. Far from it. But it's something. There is at least that anodyne for future shock, that we can have a story that at least gives us some cognitive preparation for, all those 20th century stories that I know and am familiar with, that give me a map of what life is and what my life is going to look like. There are, as Natasha said, there are alternatives. So I think one of the most important things for education is to plan for those multiple possible futures, to be intellectually humble about the fact that there is vast uncertainty in the 21st century. We could have AGI in 10 years, we could have AGI in 200 years, or never. We don't know. And the trick is probabilistic estimates, recalibrating, and thinking, okay, we have plan A, B, C, D, and E, because if we become too monolithic in our brand of transhumanism or any other mode of thinking, whether it's anthropocentrism, religious thinking, anything that it might be, we risk this state of lock-in where we are too wedded to a single picture that is too easily disrupted in a world of such change.
Thank you. I have a question which is maybe a very practical one. As a teacher myself, I'm wondering how to reach the young people. David was saying about how was it 16-year-old understandable discourse. I was saying maybe younger, but. The whole syllabus, the vital syllabus, as I discovered, I have the impression that it's much more toward much older people, and well, I think it's a very good idea, especially if we think that education in the coming decades or century, I don't know, will be something which we will follow it for until 50-year-olds. We will give up after the university. We went out of the university. Maybe I have to switch in French. Switch. Excusez-moi. Dans la perspective donc d'une éducation qui durerait 20 ans, 30 ans, 50 ans, je rêve de rester ou de revenir à l'université et d'y passer des décennies successivement, peut-être pas de manière continue, peut-être avec des pauses de plusieurs décennies entre plusieurs fois. Et alors nous aurions le temps de faire le tour de sans doute l'ensemble de ces formations et de ces connaissances. Mais jusqu'à présent, nous sommes dans un modèle particulier qui a été bâti sans être vraiment pensé, mais en fonction de la durée de vie qui était la nôtre il y a plutôt encore 50 ans. La durée des études totales n'a pas franchement changé alors que la durée de vie a déjà considérablement augmenté. Et donc, dans le cadre éducationnel institutionnel, nous ne pourrions nous adresser qu'à de relativement jeunes enfants, adolescents et jeunes adultes. Et donc, ça m'amène à me demander, est-ce que nous essayons simplement de créer d'autres outils alternatifs. Par exemple, on va utiliser les réseaux sociaux qui sont davantage accessibles à tout le monde, donc on va créer des vidéos en ligne. Ou bien est-ce qu'on doit, en même temps, et comment, s'adresser au monde institutionnel, éducatif, tel qu'il existe d'ores et déjà, et chacun dans son pays respectif. Ça, je pose la question parce qu'à titre d'enseignant, je me suis adressé déjà à l'éducation nationale française et pour la plupart du temps, je me suis cassé les dents. Est-ce que vous avez quelques idées?
Yes, okay, there's a lot there. It's interesting, I just had this vision of, transhumanists or people under the banner of a transhumanist organization going into a Department of Education and saying, let us tell you how to reform your schools, particularly, carrying this term transhumanism that has this incredible baggage about, as we've discussed, tech billionaires and radical longevity and things like that. I just have a sense that it wouldn't go down terribly well. Which is not to say that educational reform ought not to be attempted, but I think it's when you start to think about the nitty-gritty of how to make it work in real life, and what our aspirations even are, it becomes quite complex. I think the idea of how do you teach this to really young people, my instinct is you probably don't. I think it will start to penetrate the culture in deeper and deeper ways. It'll be part of stories that we tell. But this kind of rigorous pumping complex concepts into the brain of a 5-year-old, I don't think that's not what's going to happen. And I don't necessarily think that it needs to. There is this, again, to go back to the idea of the chasm between the evolved biology and the world. There is a lot to be said, I think, for educating particularly young children away from the factory farmed model of the Victorian school system, moving to the tolling of the bell, and thinking about the incredible disruption that we can all foresee. Even politicians these days can basically foresee there's going to be disruption to their job prospects, to their life arcs. And even, you know, as you're sort of referencing this stretching out of the circle of life, the normal human lifespan may change within their existence. I think there's a lot to be said for trying to tend your own garden as best you can, acknowledging this moment in time in which we are still biological humans, and little children do have certain needs that haven't changed for millions of years. To come back to a focus on how to be human, I think for the short term, whilst maintaining as a society this bigger picture exponential horizon, is something that's going to be really challenging to internalize. But for kids and for the ways that we run schools, I think the biggest and most important thing is actually to strip away this focus on exams, credentialism, the idea that if I don't get into Harvard or wherever else, I'm worthless, that my whole existence is going to be tethered to a mechanized work to live sort of script. We can see that it's going to fall away sometime in this century, very probably. And so more focus on that emotional health, that relating to other people, that being able to connect and communicate. And yes, there has to be digital literacy, but I think, ironically, because I'm very much a transhumanist, but ironically, I think we need to go back more in the interim to this mode of reading books, taking in information at the pace for which human brains were actually designed, pushing back at least on the current status quo of scroll fests of social media in which we're just inputting, as David said, lots of bad information that's sort of engulfing the good, to slow things down a little bit cognitively and to have more emphasis for little kids on play, on learning to communicate effectively, learning how to express your emotions and express an ability to bond and connect with others in a world where we're increasingly atomized. And so many people, I would say, of my generation feel starved of human connection and are desperately sort of looking back to the past to resurrect this golden age that they feel like they've lost. Now, I don't think that's an accurate perception. I think we've never had more embarrassment of riches in our world. Yet there is this legitimate feeling that there's something missing. And of course, my hope in the end is that all these technologies you're talking about, we will have better versions of social media. We will have more immersive virtual worlds. We hopefully can integrate into more complex education systems in the future where digital technologies play a greater role. But for the short term, I think you can basically piggyback off what a lot of just non-transhumanist educational reformists want to do, of stripping away the prison factory-like vibe of schools, the over-focus on exams and credentialism, the stuff that's stressing kids out, and go back to a focus more on being human.
So I will add a few more comments, drawing out these points further. To be clear, I'm not thinking of education as something that happens when we're young and that's all. I'm giving up on the idea that we have a period of life in which we learn, then we have a period of life in which we earn, and then we retire. It's all going to be mixed up. We're going to be doing all three all the time. In other words, playing and activity for earning and also learning. In terms of what the target audience should be, of course, I would like the vital syllabus to have videos and material which is age classified. So here's the standard stuff for 16-year-olds, and by the way, here's some stuff for 12-year-olds, here's some stuff for 8-year-olds. But I'm thinking, what do I need to do first? And I think once we have the material that's suitable for the 16-year-old, it's going to be easier for other people to produce versions for younger people rather than the other way around. We must get the complete story right first, and then people can figure out ways to adapt it for younger audiences. So that's looking ahead. In terms of educating younger children, There's been lots of studies that show that our youngsters often lose things as they go to school. When they are very young, if you give them a puzzle and let them solve it in a team, they will come up with more creative ideas than older children. Why? It's because they're still filled with their natural enthusiasm and joy for life. And they're not afraid of coming up with something that people consider to be stupid or the wrong answer. And they're also happy to copy from each other. But later in education, the teacher tells them, don't copy, don't be stupid. And they lose a lot of that initiative. So there's a lot to be done to provide a more holistic, a more emotionally intelligent environment. Because, as I said, we need to be better at collaborating, and we need to be better at failing and not worrying about getting things wrong, because nobody knows the right answers sometimes. Where will the disruptions take place? Often they happen outside of the mainstream. That's my learning as somebody who has studied technology disruptions for many decades. It will be nice if some of the mainstream schools and colleges adapt some of this teaching of transhumanism quickly. What's more likely is that it will be done by smaller groups. It will be found by people outside of their normal school hours. But if we start, then in due course, the mainstream will be happy, I think, to catch up. And I agree with Elise, we should not be going in to these large institutions and telling them what to do. Here's a whole course. Rather, I'm hoping to provide some raw materials, some basic syllabus materials, which they can then use in their own ways, mixing up according to their own special requirements. I started the Vital Syllabus nearly all with videos, thinking that people prefer videos these days. I've been persuaded that I need to add more text in, so in the last few months I have provided more basic text along with the videos, and I think that's important too. But anyway, we need to have the right core material, and then other people in their educational initiatives will hopefully be able to adapt it, and they'll start teaching it. And I'll be very happy for people to copy any of the material I provide. I'm not going to say don't copy. I'm going to encourage them to copy.
Well, my next question will go in French. Ma question suivante va nous ramener vers des aspects peut-être plus techniques, mais en fait, ils se veulent réfléchir sur des questions de pédagogie en même temps. Le transhumanisme fait des propositions ou propose des attitudes quand il est question de pratiques sportives, quand il est question de pratiques médicales pour chercher une plus grande longévité. Est-ce que le transhumanisme a quelque chose de particulier à dire en termes de pédagogie? Faire des vidéos, c'est pas particulièrement transhumaniste. Donner des conférences, c'est pas particulièrement transhumaniste. Est-ce que le transhumanisme a des choses à proposer, ou est-ce que parce que je sais pas, si on pense à l'éducation des enfants, on va dire on va pas toucher à la technique, ou bien à partir d'un certain âge, que sais-je, la majorité, on va dire peut-être est-ce qu'il peut y avoir des pratiques particulières, des techniques et des technologies qui peuvent être utilisées spécifiquement dans des objectifs pédagogiques pour être encore plus performants. Ou est-ce que voilà, l'enseignement du transhumanisme ne peut rester que traditionnel dans un premier temps? Qu'est-ce que vous en dites?
I think there are many things transhumanism can offer here in terms of augmenting the student. Not just in terms of their diet, but in terms of giving them tools to help. So when we are writing now, we are often augmented by the system that corrects our misspelling and may even suggest different ways to express what we're saying. It may correct our grammar. It may say, I'm writing to such a person, maybe I should use less formal language or more formal language. This is not cheating, this is helping. When I was young at school, a long time ago, there were no calculators. we had to learn to multiply using things called logarithms, which very few people here probably remember. It was painful and slow. And then calculators came and augmented our ability to do the maths. So in the chemistry lessons, we could spend more time learning the chemistry rather than spending ages figuring out how much of the reaction had changed using logarithms. So let's have more of this technology when it's ready. We should not be dominated by it. It should be a tool. But I have in one of the sections in the vital syllabus, augmentation, which is all the things that can be done to enhance our brain. And that includes traditional methods, how people can memorize more by writing down. You may see I've been writing down here. This is me augmenting my brain by writing down in the underlining and drawing boxes. Well, that's traditional and it's useful, but there are other things that can be done as well. In the future, my headset may not just tell me what Mark is saying, it may even whisper some of the answers to me. And that'll be fine too, because sometimes I can't remember all the answers, and that will augment me as well. And we must encourage students to take advantage of this without becoming passive and without taking it for granted.
Yeah, I broadly agree with that. Though I think in terms of pedagogy, like transhuman pedagogies, things that specifically are outgrowths of transhumanism, I think it makes more sense to say pedagogies for a transhuman era, thinking about education in ways that just match the changes that we are seeing in the world and living through. I also think that a lot of these technologies, whether it's Grammarly or predictive text, or eventually it's going to be a lot more AI, particularly data mining algorithms, like taking away a lot of the grunt work from research of doing literature reviews and things like that. David's absolutely right. It can free you up, in his example, to do cool things like more advanced chemistry. But my mind, still in this sort of interim world and the interim problems, often comes back to, what about the half of humanity that has an IQ below 100? How much advanced chemistry are they going to be doing realistically? And this is something that I don't have good answers to, but it's something that plagues me a lot. And I know that, as transhumanists, we often will sort of think, well, technology will be the answer to that too in the end. We'll have intelligence augmentation by whatever means that may come, whether it's genetic technologies, whether it is through digital minds and uploads and things like that. But in the interim, I'm still really fascinated by what happens to the people who feel like they are being left behind, because I think that sentiment is growing in the world. And I think kind of for good reason. There is so much to celebrate, so much wonderful progress that is happening in our world. And yet we are doing very little, politicians especially, given that it's much more under their remit than most, to sort of speak out loud to the issue of, in a knowledge economy, not everybody can harness these wonderful tools to just learn more efficiently. Not everybody has the same brain. All humans weren't created equal. Even at the higher levels, when you think about people who are very clever and this push for sort of as many women as possible to become software engineers and engineers. And I sort of think, as a woman who maybe technically could have done those things, good Lord, I really didn't want to. And I think there are dangers to sort of assuming that human beings are homogenous and that there is a sort of one-size-fits-all model that using technology we can sort of just funnel everybody into. So I'd love to hear from the audience at some stage if anybody actually has deep reflections on the idea of how to address politically, how to speak to this idea of people who feel like and indeed can't keep up, and how do we tackle the ethics of that awkward transition time?
Just one quick follow-up on that. It's my experience that when people feel stupid, it's often because that's what society has told them. They may have failed at one stage and not being able to recover. But if you put them in a different situation, they can sometimes flourish. They may actually be much better at mathematics, arithmetic at least, when they are playing snooker or when they are playing darts, when they have to figure out which 3 darts to throw to finish the game. People who apparently had IQ less than 100 can be truly inspired by that. So it is about finding the ways to support all people and often helping them to grow in different ways. And another one of my 24 top-level subject areas in the Vital Syllabus was diversity, recognizing and cherishing diversity, not treating everybody the same, though recognizing there are some core things which should be included for everybody, but finding ways to communicate to everyone. In terms of what people are going to do when they can't compete for the highest paying jobs, that's part of the transhumanist vision that we won't all be working in the future. We will be doing non-working things. At least we won't be paid for it. We'll be doing maybe playing darts, maybe playing video games, maybe exploring in nature, maybe exploring music, maybe doing things that we can hardly conceive of yet. And that will be good. And we will find ways to tap into the abilities and backgrounds and predispositions of each people to encourage everybody to grow and feel part of this society instead of being left out, which is, I agree, a terrible situation with growth of people being depressed, being alienated, suffering mental illness as a result, suffering deaths of depression as a result, becoming victim to populist, crazy ideologies as a result. It's terribly bad for society. It's terribly bad for the individuals concerned. That's why we have to ensure that our transhumanist future has a rich, engaging, exciting, uplifting story for everyone.
Yeah. Alors, nous allons passer aux questions. Je vois plusieurs mains se lever.
Three quick things. First, I published some self-promotion. I published an essay last year on intelligent tutoring systems because one of the things that you frequently hear in the automation debate is, well, there's certain things that will never be automated, like teaching, but obviously teaching can be automated, and at least some kinds of teaching. And I think that that's part of the democratization of education that we're concerned about, because higher education, as I completely agree, higher education is driving, Thomas Piketty's work on this is fantastic. It's driving the polarization and the far-right backlash that we're seeing. So we definitely need to address this sense of being left out. Second thing is there's an organization called Future Problem Solvers, which is a K-12 international program to teach futurism to K-12 kids. And I've worked with them in the past, and they're just fantastic. They're not explicitly transhumanist, but in terms of our topics, they're very great, very good. And the third thing is I just wondered if you had thoughts on popular culture and its role in this kind of education, because some of the most popular things we've ever done at the IET have been, detailed breakdowns of Battlestar Galactica or, different kinds of popular culture really engages people. And I think it's been the language of how people think about these topics for the last 200 years, Frankenstein, Brave New World, 1984, Terminator, etc. So really engaging with those, critiquing them, deconstructing them seems to be a really important part of our educational goal.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think the last part is really interesting because you mentioned Frankenstein and those kinds of stories. And you come back to the age-old problem of the fact that dystopian fiction is much easier to write than utopian fiction and much more popular. And I think we do probably everyone here would be aware, you do have the problem of the science fiction cliche with transhumanism. It is so hard to write a good story about the future that isn't really kitsch in its portrayal of the physical world, the most sort of razzle-dazzle gadgets, the flying cars, the space food, the weird aesthetics. And then, of course, some version of this sort of hero's journey where humanity prevails against the cold, evil machines. And I think that it really is baked into our cultural imagination. And unraveling that is such a challenge. The idea that there would be more fiction writers of all stripes, and I mean people creating video games, VR, Netflix series, that could create a vision of the future that feels positive, yet quite radically different from the present. Seems like it would be a really, really valuable endeavour. But I did come up against this when writing my own book, Future Superhuman, which is really future scoping the next 100 years and saying, what do we sort of have to get right in that time frame? And I tried really hard to give people this tangible taste of what the future looks and smells like, because readers kept saying, I want that. And journalists always say they want that. Tell us what the future's going to be like. Are we all going to be riding around in this or that in 10 years? And you think, oh God, I can't tell you that, because the concrete details are almost invariably boring. If we think about our future, our present relative to 10, 15 years ago, we're holding these little rectangles and we can't see the Wi-Fi signals bouncing through the room right now, connecting us all to this hive mind, this digital brain, and it's boring to write about. So I think there is this enormous challenge of trying to almost de-armor humanity against this idea when we think of machines as cold, mechanistic, non-human, inhuman, other, and threatening. And there's good reason why they can, in instantiations, be all of those things. So we shouldn't discount that either. But yeah, stories that speak to what could be great. My sense, when you really think about evolved human psychology, is that for most people, it has to be quite incremental. It has to focus on, here are the short-term gains in the next 10 years. We're not talking about radical longevity. We're talking about grandma not getting dementia. We're talking about living longer in a state of better health. All the stuff we know people are ready to open their wallets for and dig deep right now, if only we could provide them with better solutions. So I think telling stories that are, David speaks to this really well with the vital syllabus as well, things that are truthful, stories that people can believe in, this stuff really matters. And yeah, I think for the average policy agenda, for the average person trying to say this is not as repugnant or scary as you might think, you have to speak the language of the human and speak about what is concrete in their lifetime in the next 10 or 20 years.
Thanks for the tip about the future problem solvers, James. I've just augmented myself with my smartphone and looked up the site, and it looks fascinating. I will look at that. I agree with you in terms of education can go a long way by reflecting on stories that are useful and important, or maybe not useful, but they should still be discussed because they are key in society. I have a section in one of my books about all the things that's wrong with the Terminator, which is such a dominant archetype, but it misleads the discussion on AI risk quite significantly. We should also, I think, be better at spreading our recommendations about good, positive, constructive, credible fiction of the future. So one book I came across recently, it was almost called 2084 by echo to 1984. 1984 by George Orwell was looking ahead to a terrible future, which has largely, in many ways, come true, sadly. But Michael Rogers, who's not so well known as George Orwell, he wrote a book called Email from the Future, which is set in 2084, and he tries to portray a future which I think is pretty credible. I've got some questions about it, but he makes a good job of explaining how humans were able to address really tough problems like accelerating climate change, like the other things wrong with society, like social media tearing us apart, how technology and politics was able, stage by stage, to claw back these problems from being existential risks to being manageable. So we should share amongst ourselves hints of what these good stories are. So please let me know what your favourite stories of the future are, stories that are reasonably credible, but also they're not just, oh, there's a bad guy coming up now to spoil the plot. Another source of good stories is K-drama. And I say this because my wife is South Korean, and you may well know about K-pop, or some of you may know K-drama, and I occasionally sit down and watch, and they often have clever visions of the future they gradually teach. So 15 years ago, they used to introduce mobile phones and smartphones into their plot line, and they were teaching the Korean housewives how to anticipate the use of smartphones, which is very thoughtful, and it was quite credible as well. Nowadays, the drama's much better. There's much less overacting. It's That was my complaint about Korean dramas 15 years ago, but today it's really world class. And so some of these stories, and I wish I could give you the names off the top of my head. My brain isn't good enough for that, unaugmented, but there are some good stuff out there. So let's share what these stories are amongst themselves so we can all learn from it.
Hi. So I want to just say, David, I really love this initiative of Vital Syllabus. I think it's a really great initiative. Myself, being an educator for over 15 years, I work mostly with young children between the age of 2 and 6, sometimes up to 12. I just wanted to make a comment about what I think is really one of the most important aspects is about learning how to learn, because I, as a Montessori educator as well, Maria Montessori spoke about the really sensitive ages of children between the ages of 3 and 6, and then the next phase between 6 and 12, where children are really, they're constructing their sense of self, their sense of self-confidence, and this is really when they learn how to learn and how to approach the world. So I think developing something for younger educators could be really important in creating this solid basis for the future generation. And particularly in France, the school system is very, very rigid and very traditional, unless you have certain private schools. And my question to both of you is, how do you think we can... Because we really do need school reform. It's so focused on academia, learning by memory, evaluation, rather than, like Elise, you mentioned, emotional learning and being able to problem solve by trial and error. So as someone inside the education system, I would really think you need to contact teachers or people who are passionate from the inside. And do you have any ideas from within this traditional system how we could approach reform and change in a positive way, but in a really rigid and traditional system? Because they are trying to reform it, but like everything in France, it takes a long time and the administration is just so long. But we do need these children now to be more self-confident and more equipped to deal with the future.
I'll answer quickly and then hand over to Elise. It's remarkable how many famous and almost genius-like characters have had Montessori education. Again, my smartphone helped me out here. Sergey Brin and Larry Page, the co-founders of Google, Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, Jimmy Wales, the person behind Wikipedia. So, I mean, that's not enough to be statistically significant, but when you look at it, clearly there seems to be the possibility for doing something remarkably right there. So your question, Thea, is how do we help the larger educational establishment adopt some of these practices? And it may be that it's easier to do it outside, so that it's not part of the full-time education. It's something that happens part of the time. There'll be some homeschooling. I'm not a great fan of homeschooling generally. I think it's important for people to mix. But there may be when people see more evidence that this teaches the emotional intelligence and collaborative spirit that's important, then others will adopt it. And yet there are, of course, inside these large schools, there are some extremely talented, extremely wonderful teachers, and we must do that as well.
Brief answer is no, I don't have the solution, but it's the right line of questioning, and particularly to the rigid and traditional society. I think that's harder, and it does speak to the contrast between this rapid acceleration of change and what's possible in our world versus the pace of institutional adaptation, which is often much slower. Where there are really strong traditionalist norms in place, and it kind of shows us that you can't just invent the tech and go barnstorming straight on through, at least not always in every situation. Both my parents are high school teachers. They actually taught at my school, which is a bit of an unusual arrangement. So I've sort of grown up watching that system in place, and it does strike me that a particular type of person tends to be attracted to becoming a teacher, and I think that's further reinforced. I'm not sure in France, but in a lot of countries, I think it's sort of been relegated to a not very high status position in society. that teaching in the whole paradigm of education isn't thought to be, everyone sort of says kids are our future, kids are so important, and yet we don't sort of really walk the walk when it comes to that. I kind of think that diversifying, similar to what David says, makes sense. Having lots of different models simultaneously, running them, some experiments outside of that system so that people can see the success or failure of those systems. Having different models seems like a good idea, but also like a top-down approach. If you can have people in government, and again, I have absolutely no idea how you achieve this, but more people within the political system that actually feel the impetus, feel the sense of, okay, this is my kids, this is our future, stuff is changing really, really fast. We cannot maintain the status quo, but unfortunately, we are hamstrung there by perverse incentives. We're hamstrung by the short election cycles that politicians are primed to operate around, and until that changes, I don't know how you get effective institutional change anywhere, because our ape brains, unfortunately, hopelessly corruptible to the short-term I, me, mine incentives that trump long-term future planning.
There are some countries that do seem to reward their teachers better. So I'm thinking of Finland, where there is a lot of evidence of successful schooling, and teachers there are highly regarded, not just in terms of, they're doing a good job, but I think they are paid a bit more. So it may be that we can accumulate evidence from some other countries.
D'accord, il y a encore 4 questions, donc je vous prierai d'en tenir compte dans votre manière de les poser et peut-être d'y répondre.
Je vais aller dans le sens de madame qui a parlé avant moi. La préoccupation est celle de savoir comment cette éducation qui se veut transhumaniste peut être prise en charge, doit de manière officielle, difficile. Parce que officielle, ça veut dire il y a une loi qui doit être, comment dire ça, publier un programme. Ça n'est pas de ce côté que je verrais. L'éducation transhumaniste fondée sur des propositions concrètes, y compris de la vision de l'homme, le créatif, celui qui cherche l'excellence. Et alors, ça, c'est des idées générales qui peuvent passer par des moyens comme des vidéos, etc. Mais alors, la question que je vous pose est celle-ci. Comme je vois que ça ne peut aller que dans ce qui se fait aujourd'hui, à savoir les réseaux sociaux. Le transhumanisme ne peut pas engager quelque chose qui va être tiré de gauche à droite par les réseaux qui existent. Si le transhumanisme, s'il n'y a pas à l'aide du transhumanisme, les gens mettant la main à la poche pour créer un réseau, pour entrer dans le jeu des réseaux. Sinon, on va être mangé par les réseaux. Ils vont dire détruire, puisque effectivement, le sujet n'est pas un sujet, comment on dit ça, consensuel, que tout le monde est d'accord, tout le monde sait de quoi il s'agit. Il y a toujours des suspicions sur le transhumanisme, vous le savez bien. Alors, c'est pour cela que le discours très sécurisé dans la présentation d'une éducation transhumaniste me paraît un peu, effectivement, trop, comment on dit ça, optimiste. Et c'est pour cela que je vous invite à penser à jouer dans la cour de ce que dans le monde d'aujourd'hui, on voit jouer. C'est-à-dire, ils ont créé Facebook, ils ont créé l'autre réseau, ils ont créé. Il faut quelqu'un qui crée un réseau. Et là, effectivement, on a la possibilité, comme ils font dans ces réseaux, de fermer la porte à ceux qui viennent détruire, qui viennent diffamer, et d'ouvrir à ceux qui sont dans cette mouvance-là. Parce qu'on ne peut pas ne pas se préoccuper, effectivement, de faire en sorte qu'il y ait une harmonie qui accompagne l'éducation, le passage, la distribution des visions inspiré par la pensée transhumaniste. Voilà ce que je voulais. Alors la question concerne le réseau, hein, c'est-à-dire il faut qu'il y ait un réseau, ça suppose qu'il y ait quelqu'un qui finance, etc. Et pourquoi pas aller dans cette direction? Vous venez des États-Unis, la Silicon Valley, beaucoup d'argent se dépense là-bas. Il faudrait bien que quelqu'un fasse ce travail. Et l'Institut pour l'humanité, ben oui, Kurzweil et tous les autres. Moi, je suis désolé, je prononce des noms pour montrer qu'il faut parler des choses concrètes. Voilà.
There are tangible things. There are networks. There are many transhumanist groups on Facebook. There are transhumanist Discord groups. There is a Discord group for Vital Syllabus. And I think Natasha, if she would hear, she would say she is building a network through her regular transhumanist studies events. Now, they're in English, and it probably needs to be similar ones in other languages. But you're entirely right. We can't do this as individuals. If we try and do it as individuals, we will fail. We must network together, and we must take advantage of existing technologies. I don't think we need to build our own brand new social network. We can take advantage of the social networks that are here already.
Beautifully said. I have nothing further.
Okay. Hello. Good evening. My name is Pierre Collet. I'm going to talk later on. Just to make a couple of things clear, it seems to me there's a big misconception in how you described education. Education is not about teaching. Education is not about learning. If you're looking at the etymology of education, education means ex ducere. Ex means out of, okay, and ducere is the duke, the duce, okay, in Italian. And the duke means the direction. And to educate is to take a child and put him out of his way being in meta-ethics, the first meta-ethics, which is the ethics of the gods, which is the ethics of tradition. Whenever your father was a farmer, the son was supposed to be a farmer, okay, whenever he was a blacksmith, son was supposed to be a blacksmith, because due to tradition you had to repeat the past, because the past had been created by the gods, so it was perfect, and so you had to re-implement the past to try to get back to the original perfection of the cosmos. And so education is about giving the possibility to children to get out of their planned way, we're given by tradition. And the way you educate, teaching is top-down. It comes from professorship, professoring. Professoring is profitere. It is telling in front of other people what you know. This is top-down thing. Education is done through problems. The problem, the etymology of problem is pro, means in front, and blum comes from balein in Greek, and balein means throwing. And the purpose of the educator is to throw in front of the child an obstacle. And whether the child can get over the obstacle or not, if the child can go over the obstacle, then the child elevates, because by going over the obstacle you improve and you elevate yourself. This is why in French a student is called an élève, because you're the teacher, and the educator, not the teacher, is supposed to elevate him or her by throwing an obstacle in front of him or her. And this opens the way to research, because when you're a professor, then you can do research with a doctoral student by throwing in front something you may not even know how to surmount yourself. Okay, how to overcome it. Meaning that you can have students that can become better than their teachers, than their educators. And but if the student cannot go over the obstacle, then the obstacle puts him or her away. If the father was an engineer and said, well, my son, you will become an engineer as I was before, but the son is not really a scientist or, good in mathematics or in physics or whatsoever. So the obstacles, the scientific obstacles that would be put before him by the educator will actually throw him away from what his father intended him to do. And maybe he will become an artist, maybe he will become something else. And so just by educating, doing your job as an educator, which is to throw obstacles in front of the child in order to give him the ability either to elevate or to be diverted from his original path, well, you open up all the possibilities. And so this is not about teaching, it's not about learning. Learning is about memorizing what people tell you. This is not education.
Okay, I'm going to take that one as a comment. I don't know if David would like to jump in.
I think in order to have obstacles you can throw in front, it will help you if you have a bundle of ideas ready. And the ideas in the vital syllabus may be exactly that kind of thing. They will say, have you considered this? How would you solve this problem? And that was how, in my software engineering management career, we trained our bright young graduate students. Sometimes we gave them tasks that we knew the answers to, but as you say, sometimes you give them tasks that we don't know what the answer is, and the students don't know what they can't achieve, and sometimes they do achieve it. And indeed, that's how you can encourage progress.
Once again, thank you for your presentations. My question is going to be so fast. Can transhumanism be compatible with something offering a kind of experience of awe and wonder? Can we marshal a response which is going to be artistic when beauty can blow your mind, which is good for you, said the scientist, the neuroscientist. I think your novel, non-fiction novel, it's a good maybe example. Can we just think about something like that, which is not only good for transhumanists to spread their ideas, but also for adults? We talked about children, but the UN numbers are quite alarming. I mean, 800,000 people killed themselves by depression, which is beyond the numbers of victims that die from military conflicts and natural disasters combined. Or otherwise, we're just going to be stuck in which Edward O. Wilson said, we have Paleolithic brains, medieval laws, and godlike technologies.
Natasha Vitamore would point you to the transhumanist art statement, which she put together sometime in the 1980s. And it was very much about inspiring people to think via not just words, but also visions, engaging different parts of people's minds. So indeed, I'm entirely with you. We must have a narrative which appeals not just to the logical part. This is when I said, a bit flippantly, that transhumanism can be the culmination of what religion is trying to do. Religion provides people with an overarching story which makes them achieve incredible things. Well, I think transhumanism has that same remarkable overarching story. It says that we're at the point of breaking through to a new level of species. We're at the point of creating something brand new with super longevity, super intelligence, super well-being, super democracy, sustainable superabundance. And we're getting there by going through a number of industrial revolutions, of which we're in the fourth today, and the fifth is just around the corner. And by the way, we have the possibilities of being part of the first immortal generation. And if we are blind, we will be part of the last mortal generation. And if we are really foolish, we will see a new dark age. There are big primeval themes there. And indeed, they can, in the right circumstances, inspire awe and inspire huge activity. And we need to figure out the way to communicate like that as well as communicate. And by the way, I think if you read Lisa's book, you will find yourself in awe in some of the passages there.
Thank you, David. One of the things that most excites me and always has about transhumanism is this very notion of a future of enhanced beauty, pleasure, ranges of, if you will, spiritual experience, things that I think it's most apt to say we lack the words for now. And things that I think some of us can access now. I think the closest analogues to these kinds of ecstatic beauties are orgasmic bliss, are being deeply, deeply in love, are taking psychedelics. I think there are a range of ways we can currently, as we are, tap into things that are incredibly beautiful. And the experience of communing with really astonishing works of art. That's what's always sort of drawn us to this quasi-religious sensibility. You walk into some of the most beautiful churches in Paris and they are literally designed to hack your nervous system to induce some of those higher feelings. And of course, we want to expand our reach to access those states. But I think it's also important to talk about excitement for such a future in the context of still being able to acknowledge the tragedy, as you've mentioned, of the high rates of depression in our society, of the high rates of people who are not finding ready access to those states, who are feeling downtrodden, whose lives are working to live, trudging about. You do see this look often in England on people's faces, England being one of the poorest of the Western industrial nations now. Just this look of Sisyphean resignation to life, as it seems to me. And I think that's an incredibly tragic thing. And we do, of course, want to create a world where, through economic growth, where AI could and will help with this, that there is more abundance, that there is more access to freedom to think, freedom to commune, time to actually engage with your own personhood, time to, if you are so inclined, create great art. If you are differently inclined, perhaps disappear into wire-headed bliss, or whatever your pleasure may be. And I think, again, it is really important to be open to a range of different desirable futures there, that it isn't a one-size-fits-all equation. But I will say in general, I think transhumanists often do quite a poor job of speaking to this. There is a kind of sense that, and perhaps unfairly, but I think a sense that audiences often receive of, but you are just talking about this jacked up technocratic system that doesn't feel human, that doesn't feel warm, that doesn't feel any of the things I want to feel. And even, I think, I can't quite remember the term David used, and David, you're absolutely one of the most unimpeachable transhumanists I know, but it was just a moment where it was something to do with super longevity, or one of those terms where I just felt, oh, that's the moment where any other audience, you've lost them immediately. Their minds have switched off because you've crossed this almost unbelievability threshold where they've gone, that won't happen. That's from a science fiction book. Now you're in the hubristic camp. Now you're just trying to sell me cheap trinkets, cheap ideals about the future, so I won't be able to air my grievances in the present. And I think we need to hold those two things together. There are grievances in the present. We must speak to them and look them in the eye without overselling a radiant future, but still aspiring to it.
Hello. So it's better when the education is fun, because we remember more easy. But education is not only getting knowledge, it's also a process, and it's very important to have the process. By process, I mean read scientific articles, make demonstration. It's to know, it's not getting the knowledge, but to know how the knowledge exists, how it has been created, because it's very important, because there is a lot of fake news. And it's very difficult to make this process fun, because it means to compare different things. And I would like to know what is your solution to make the process fun.
Can I just clarify, was the last bit to make the process fun?
Is the process to know how the knowledge has been created, how the theory has been created, which kind of experiences which has been made, reading articles. It's the critics, all the process to know how it's not only to know an electron or a photon exists, is how do the scientist created this knowledge.
I wouldn't say the word fun is the relevant thing here. The thing is that it should be engaging and uplifting. And I think also it's a skill from the teacher, the writer, the communicator to communicate in a way that keeps people's attention and makes them want to read more and makes them glad to have read more. So good writers need to know the facts, but they also need to how to write intelligently. And often people can learn that skill as well. And they can learn to weave in little stories. They can learn to weave in little twists and turns in the narrative so that people are pleasantly surprised. And if we do that, we will help people to master difficult concepts more willingly.